The Boeing 787 Dreamliner cruised at 39,000 feet, its passengers blissfully unaware that the woman in seat 8A had once pulled off the most classified aerial extraction in modern military history. Viviana Viper Castellano adjusted her Hermes scarf and sipped Dom Perignon, her manicured fingers betraying no hint of the calluses that once gripped joysticks through impossible maneuvers. The tech fortune she'd built after leaving the Navy had afforded her this luxury, but beneath the designer exterior, her eyes still swept the cabin with tactical awareness. She noticed them before they reached first class. Three men moving with that particular economy of motion that screamed special operations. Their civilian clothes couldn't mask the way they scanned exits, the subtle bulge of concealed weapons, or how they communicated through barely perceptible glances. Viviana's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from recognition of something she'd left behind 8 years ago. The lead operator, a granite-faced man with graying temples, approached her row. He leaned down, his voice barely audible above the cabin's white noise. "Viper," he whispered, using the call sign she thought had died with her military career. "We need to talk." Viviana's champagne glass paused halfway to her lips. Only a handful of people knew that name, and most of them were either dead or buried so deep in classified programs they might as well be. She studied his face, weathered, serious, with the kind of eyes that had seen too much. Behind him, his teammates maintained casual positions that weren't casual at all. "I'm sorry, you must have me confused with someone else," she said smoothly, her voice carrying just the right note of wealthy confusion. But her left hand moved instinctively to her lap, fingers positioning in a way that would allow quick access to the ceramic blade hidden in her designer bracelet. Old habits die hard. "Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Commander Marcus Kane, DVGRU. We have a code black situation developing, and frankly, you're the only pilot qualified for what's coming." His voice carried an edge of desperation that made Viviana's breath catch. Code Black meant imminent threat to national security. She looked past him toward the cockpit, her mind already calculating. The aircraft's captain would be competent for commercial flight, but what Kane was implying required skills that existed in maybe a dozen people worldwide. Skills she'd spent years trying to forget. The other passengers continued their conversations, oblivious to the fact that their relaxing flight was about to become something else entirely. Viviana set down her champagne and looked directly into Kane's eyes. The woman in 8A was gone. In her place sat Viper, and the sky had just become dangerous again. Kane slid into the seat beside her, his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere from casual luxury to tactical briefing. 12 hours ago, a rogue cell intercepted a cargo plane carrying experimental stealth technology over the Pacific. The pilot managed to transmit coordinates before going dark. They're holding the aircraft and crew on a private island, heavily fortified. Satellite imagery shows surface-to-air missiles, and intelligence suggests they plan to auction the technology to the highest bidder by dawn. Viviana's fingers traced the rim of her champagne glass, a nervous habit she'd developed long after her Navy days. "And you're telling me this because..." But she already knew. The sick feeling in her stomach told her everything she needed to know. Because the island has a landing strip that's 800 meters long, carved into volcanic rock, with crosswinds that regularly hit 40 knots. The approach requires threading between two radar installations while maintaining NOE flight profile. Kane's voice dropped even lower. "We need someone who can put a bird down in impossible conditions, extract our team and the hostages, and get out before their response team can react." She closed her eyes briefly. 800 meters. She'd done shorter, but not with passengers, not with lives hanging in the balance beyond her own team. "What's the aircraft?" "Modified MV-22 Osprey, but that's not the real problem." Kane handed her what looked like a business card but felt heavier, titanium, with encrypted data strips along the edges. "The weather window closes in 18 hours. There's a typhoon approaching from the southwest, and after that the site becomes unreachable for 6 days. If we don't move now, that technology disappears forever. Viviana studied the card, recognizing the subtle authentication marks that proved this wasn't some elaborate hoax. The weight of familiar responsibility settled on her shoulders like an old flight jacket. My company has obligations, board meetings, a product launch next week that's worth $2 billion. The technology on that plane is worth more than your entire company, and in the wrong hands it could shift the global balance of power. Kane's eyes never left her face. I know what we're asking. I know what you left behind and why. But right now, you're the only person who can do this. Through the oval window, the Pacific stretched endlessly below, deceptively peaceful at this altitude. Viviana had made her fortune in tech specifically to avoid moments like this, to never again feel the weight of lives depending on her split-second decisions. But she could already feel her pulse shifting into pre-mission rhythm, her mind automatically calculating fuel loads, approach vectors, and escape routes. "Who else knows I'm on this flight?" she asked quietly. "Need-to-know basis. 3 people." Kane's answer was immediate, professional. She nodded slowly, then looked directly at him. "If I do this, it's my operation, my rules, my responsibility." Kane's relief was barely visible, but she caught it. "Yes, ma'am." Viviana reached for the aircraft phone built into her armrest. Time to make some very expensive phone calls and explain to her board why their CEO was about to disappear into a classified operation that officially didn't exist. The woman who'd sworn never to fly in harm's way again was about to break that promise, and somewhere deep inside, a part of her that had been sleeping for 8 years finally woke up. The flight attendant approached with practiced discretion. "Ms. Castellanos, is everything all right?" "Change of plans," Viviana said calmly, handing her the phone. "I need to speak with the captain about an emergency diversion." Kane watched her transformation with professional appreciation. The billionaire was disappearing, replaced by someone who spoke in tactical shorthand and moved with lethal precision. But he also saw something else in her eyes, a flicker of fear that she was trying very hard to hide. Whatever had made her leave the military wasn't just about wanting a different life. Something had broken her confidence, and now they were asking her to risk everything to get it back. "Viper," he said quietly, "what happened before? What made you walk away?" She paused, her hand still on the phone. When she looked at him, her expression was carefully neutral, but he could see the ghost of old pain. "You don't have enough clearance for that story, Commander. But if we're doing this, you need to understand. I don't leave people behind anymore. Everyone comes home, or no one does." The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning, hinting at a history that had clearly cost her more than just her military career. Kane nodded, recognizing the unspoken terms of their agreement. Whatever demons Viper was carrying, this mission would either exorcise them or destroy her completely. Outside, the Pacific continued its endless dance with the sky, indifferent to the lives about to be wagered on one woman's ability to overcome her past. The commercial airliner's cockpit felt cramped compared to the military aircraft Viviana remembered, but she settled into the co-pilot's seat with familiar ease. Captain Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran of commercial aviation, looked distinctly uncomfortable having his routine flight commandeered by people with government credentials and serious expressions. "Ma'am, I need to understand what we're dealing with here," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone trying to maintain professional composure while his world shifted around him. "My passengers, my crew, they're my responsibility." Viviana appreciated his position. She'd felt the same protective instinct countless times. "Captain, within the next 4 hours, this aircraft will divert to Naval Air Station Whidbey Island. Your passengers will be informed of a mechanical issue requiring precautionary landing. They'll be provided hotel accommodations at government expense, and you'll receive full compensation for the delay." Through the cockpit windows, The afternoon sun painted the clouds in shades of gold and amber. Beautiful flying weather, the kind that had first made her fall in love with aviation as a teenager in San Antonio. Her father, a retired Air Force mechanic, had taken her to watch the Thunderbirds perform, and she'd known instantly that her future lay in the sky. Kane appeared in the doorway, holding a tablet loaded with classified briefing materials. "Viper, we've got updated intelligence. The island's defensive posture is more sophisticated than initially reported. They've installed radar-guided systems, which means your approach will need to be even more precise." She studied the aerial photographs, her mind automatically processing angles, distances, and threat vectors. The landing strip looked like a scar cut into volcanic rock, barely wide enough for an Osprey's rotor span. Approach from the west meant flying directly over their radar installation. From the east meant dealing with the cliff face and unpredictable wind sheer from the mountain. "What's the payload?" she asked, already knowing she wouldn't like the answer. 12 operators, plus extraction of 5 hostages and recovered materials. Full combat load. Viviana's jaw tightened. Heavy aircraft, maximum stress on the airframe, less room for error. She'd done similar extractions before, but never after 8 years of civilian flying, never with her skills potentially dulled by comfort and success. Time to target. 14 hours once we reach Whidbey. The typhoon's moving faster than projected. She nodded, accepting the compressed timeline. There would be no time for extensive preparation, no opportunity to test her reflexes or shake off the civilian softness. She'd have to trust that muscle memory and instinct would be enough. Rodriguez cleared his throat. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, what exactly did you fly in the Navy?" Viviana glanced at him, seeing genuine curiosity beneath the professional concern. "Things that weren't supposed to exist, Captain. Places that aren't on any map." She turned back to the tactical display, but noticed Kane watching her carefully. He'd done his homework, probably knew more about her service record than she was comfortable with. "The Mogadishu extraction," Kane said quietly. "Operation Silent Thunder, that was you." She felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the weight of memories she'd spent years learning to carry. "That operation is still classified, Commander." "I know, I was there, ground team leader." His voice carried a note of something, respect, maybe gratitude. "You pulled us out of an impossible situation." Viviana's hands stilled on the controls. She'd never known the names of the men she'd extracted that night, never learned what happened to them afterward. The mission had been compartmentalized, sanitized, filed away in the depths of classified archives. But she remembered the weight of their lives in her aircraft, the sound of gunfire fading as they'd climbed into the darkness. Now one of those lives had a name and was sitting 3 feet away, asking her to do it again. The MV-22 Osprey waited on the tarmac at Whidbey Island like a mechanical predator, its twin rotors folded back in airplane configuration. Viviana walked around the aircraft slowly, her trained eye cataloging every detail: fresh maintenance tags, full fuel load, modifications she didn't recognize. The avionics package had been upgraded significantly since her last flight, but the basic airframe remained familiar, reliable. Chief Warrant Officer Torres, the aircraft's crew chief, followed her inspection with professional interest. "She's been modified for extended range and enhanced stealth signature reduction," he explained. "New composite materials in the rotor blades, upgraded engine management system. Should give you about 20% better fuel efficiency and reduced acoustic signature." Viviana ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the slight texture difference in the stealth coating. The aircraft represented millions of dollars in advanced technology, but ultimately, it would come down to her ability to make the right decisions in the crucial seconds when everything went wrong. And something always went wrong. "Flight envelope characteristics?" she asked. "Similar to standard configuration, but she's heavier with the modifications. Auto-rotation capabilities are slightly reduced, and you'll want to be careful with aggressive maneuvering at high altitude. Torres handed her a tablet containing the updated flight manual. New nav system integrates with satellite reconnaissance feeds in real time. You'll be able to see threat positions updated every 30 seconds. Kane approached with his team, 12 men who moved with the confident precision of elite operators. They wore civilian clothes now, but Viviana could see the warrior underneath. The way they unconsciously maintained tactical spacing, how their eyes constantly assessed their surroundings, the subtle deference they showed to Kane's leadership. "Ma'am," Kane said formally, "I'd like to introduce the team." She held up a hand. "No names, no backgrounds. I don't want to know who you are beyond call signs and operational capabilities." The words came out harder than she'd intended, but she saw understanding in Kane's eyes. It was easier to risk faceless operators than friends, easier to make impossible choices when lives were just tactical assets. "Understood," Kane replied. "We'll brief the mission parameters during flight." Viviana nodded, then turned to Torres. "Pre-flight complete." "Yes, ma'am. All systems green, weather routing calculated for optimal approach to target." He paused, studying her face. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me saying, it's an honor to fly with you. Stories about your flying are still told in the maintenance shops." She felt a flush of pride mixed with discomfort. The legends had grown beyond reality, creating expectations she wasn't sure she could meet anymore. "Stories have a way of getting better with time, Chief." "Maybe so, ma'am, but some things don't need exaggeration." As the team loaded their equipment, Viviana settled into the pilot's seat and began her systems check. Each switch position, every instrument reading, the feel of the controls under her hands, it all came flooding back with startling clarity. Her civilian life had been built on complexity, negotiation, the subtle art of corporate warfare. This was different. This was pure, immediate binary, success or failure, life or death. The radio crackled with air traffic control clearance, and she acknowledged with crisp professionalism. Behind her, the SEAL team secured their gear with the efficient silence of men who knew their business. Through the windscreen, the Pacific stretched toward darkness, hiding the island where hostages waited and enemies prepared their defenses. Viviana advanced the throttles, feeling the Osprey's twin engines spool up to full power. The aircraft lifted smoothly into the gathering dusk, its rotors gradually transitioning to forward flight configuration. Below them, the lights of civilization fell away, replaced by the vast emptiness of the ocean. For the first time in 8 years, she was flying toward danger instead of away from it, and despite her fears, it felt like coming home. The Osprey cruised through the night at 200 knots, its stealth modifications making it nearly invisible to radar. In the cargo compartment, Kane's team conducted final equipment checks while Viviana monitored weather patterns and updated intelligence feeds. The typhoon was intensifying faster than predicted, turning their narrow weather window into a razor-thin margin for error. "Viper, we're getting updated satellite imagery," Kane said through the intercom, his voice tight with concern. "They've moved additional surface-to-air missiles into position. Looks like they're expecting company." Viviana studied the reconnaissance photos on her multifunction display. 6 SA-18 missile launchers now ringed the island's perimeter, creating interlocking fields of fire that would make any conventional approach suicidal. But conventional approaches weren't what had made her reputation. "Chief Torres," she called to the crew chief, "what's our current weight distribution?" 12 operators, full combat load, plus extraction equipment. We're at maximum allowable gross weight for this configuration." She nodded, her mind calculating performance parameters. Heavy aircraft meant reduced maneuverability and longer stopping distances. The margin for error was shrinking by the hour, but she'd flown heavier birds into tighter spots. The key was accepting that some risks couldn't be mitigated, only managed. "Team leader," she said to Kane, "I need to know the exact extraction sequence. How long from touchdown to wheels up?" Optimistically, 8 minutes. The hostages are being held in a compound approximately 400 meters from the landing zone. We'll need to breach, secure, and move them across open ground. Kane's voice carried the weight of tactical reality. If we encounter unexpected resistance, timeline extends significantly. Through the windscreen, the first hints of dawn painted the eastern horizon in pale gold. Beautiful morning for flying, terrible morning for dying. Viviana had learned to appreciate both simultaneously during her Navy years. The way danger heightened every sensation, made colors more vivid and moments more precious. Her satellite phone buzzed with an encrypted message from her company's board of directors. The product launch was proceeding without her. Stock prices were stable. Her absence was being managed professionally. Everything she'd built was continuing without her, which should have been reassuring but somehow felt hollow. She'd created a life that functioned perfectly well without her presence, while these men needed her skills to survive the next few hours. "Viper," Kane said, settling into the co-pilot's seat, "can I ask you something personal?" She glanced at him, nodding the careful way he'd phrased the request. "Depends on the question." "Mogadishu, what really happened that night?" Viviana's hands tightened imperceptibly on the controls. The official report had been sanitized, classified, buried under layers of bureaucracy. But she remembered every second. The way the aircraft had shuddered under enemy fire, the weight of wounded men in her cargo bay, the impossible decision she'd had to make. "We completed the mission," she said finally. "Everyone came home." Everyone except Petty Officer Martinez. The name hit her like a physical blow. Carlos Martinez, 19 years old, from Houston, Texas. He'd volunteered to stay behind and operate the extraction winch when they'd realized the aircraft was too heavy to achieve stable hover under fire. She'd watched him through the cargo bay door as they'd climbed away, seen him smile and give a thumbs up even as enemy forces closed on his position. "Martinez knew the risks," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "He made his choice. He made it because you told him to." The accusation hung in the air between them. Kane wasn't being cruel. He was trying to understand, to gauge whether she could handle command decisions under pressure. But he'd touched the wound that had ended her military career, the reason she'd walked away from everything she'd ever wanted to be. "Yes," she said quietly. "I gave the order. I left him behind because saving 11 men was more important than losing 12. It was the right tactical decision. But not one you could live with." Viviana stared ahead into the growing dawn, remembering the sound of Martinez's voice over the radio as they'd flown away. He joked about missing his sister's wedding, asked them to tell his mother he loved her. Professional to the end, dying alone so others could live. "The right decision and the one you can sleep with aren't always the same thing, Commander. I learned that night that I didn't have what it takes for that level of command." She turned to look at him directly. "But I can still fly the aircraft. I can still get your people home." Kane studied her face, seeing the vulnerability beneath the professional competence. "Martinez's family, they received full benefits, honors, closure. Because you brought his body home 3 weeks later in an unsanctioned mission that should have gotten you court-martialed." She'd almost forgotten he might have access to the classified files. The unauthorized mission to recover Martinez had cost her career, but saved her soul. Sometimes honor and regulation pointed in different directions. "Ancient history, Commander. Right now, you need to focus on keeping your team alive for the next few hours." But as the Osprey continued its flight toward danger, both of them knew that Martinez's ghost was flying with them, a reminder of the price of command and the weight of impossible choices. The island appeared on their horizon like a dark jewel set in the Pacific's morning blue, its volcanic peaks shrouded in clouds that would provide natural concealment for their approach. Viviana began her descent from 30,000 feet, using the storm system's edge to mask their approach signature. The Osprey's stealth modifications were good, but not perfect. Success would depend on timing, weather, and a healthy dose of luck. Contact called tours from the sensor station. Multiple radar emissions bearing 040, range 40 nautical miles. They're actively searching. Viviana adjusted their approach vector, threading between the radar coverage zones while maintaining enough altitude to clear the mountain peaks. The aircraft's new navigation system painted a three-dimensional picture of the threats, showing safe corridors that existed for mere minutes before shifting weather and patrol patterns closed them. Team, we're 15 minutes from insertion, Kane announced to his operators. Final equipment check, sound off when ready. The responses came back in clipped professional tones, call signs only, acknowledgments of readiness. These men had done this hundreds of times, but never with stakes this high. The stolen technology could revolutionize military aviation, or, in the wrong hands, render current defense systems obsolete. Viper, I'm reading wind shear warnings around the island, Torres reported. Gusts up to 60 knots, variable direction. The typhoon's outer bands are already affecting local weather patterns. She acknowledged the warning while studying the satellite weather feed. The storm was moving faster than predicted, compressing their operational window even further. They'd have perhaps 30 minutes on the ground before conditions became impossible for flight operations. Chief, what's our fuel state? Sufficient for mission plus 30-minute reserve, assuming normal flight profiles. Torres paused. If we encounter extended combat maneuvering or have to hold for weather, reserves become critical. Viviana nodded grimly. Another variable beyond her control, another constraint on an already impossible mission. But impossible was what they'd trained for, what separated elite units from conventional forces. The word existed for other people. Beginning approach, she announced, transitioning the Osprey from airplane to helicopter mode. The twin rotors shifted smoothly overhead, and the aircraft's flight characteristics changed dramatically. Where moments before they'd been a fast-moving airplane, they now became a vulnerable helicopter, exposed to ground fire and dependent on her ability to maneuver in 3 dimensions. The island's terrain was even more challenging than the satellite photos had suggested. Jagged volcanic rock created wind patterns that shifted unpredictably, and the landing zone was smaller than advertised, barely long enough for the Osprey's fuselage, with no margin for overshoot or undershoot. SAM sites are active, Kane reported, monitoring enemy communications. They know something's coming but haven't acquired us yet. Through the windscreen, Viviana could see the compound where the hostages were being held, a cluster of concrete buildings surrounded by high walls and guard towers. Thermal imaging showed heat signatures moving within the perimeter, but distinguishing between hostages and hostiles was impossible from this distance. She began her final approach, using the mountain's bulk to mask their presence until the last possible moment. The aircraft descended through swirling clouds and shifting wind patterns, every control input requiring immediate correction as atmospheric conditions tried to throw them off course. 60 seconds, she called to Kane's team. Behind her, 12 of America's most elite warriors prepared to risk everything on her ability to put them exactly where they needed to be, exactly when they needed to be there. No pressure at all. The landing zone rushed up to meet them as Viviana brought the Osprey down through the final 100 feet of altitude. Wind shear caught the aircraft at 50 feet, slamming them sideways toward the cliff face, but she corrected with smooth control inputs that belied the chaos of the moment. The volcanic rock surface was rougher than it had appeared in satellite photos, scattered with debris that could damage the landing gear or worse. 30 seconds, she called, fighting to maintain stable hover in winds that seemed determined to dash them against the mountainside. Kane's team was already moving, checking weapons and preparing for immediate egress. They knew the drill: fast exit, secure the perimeter, move to objectives. Every second on the ground increased their vulnerability to counterattack. I have visual on the compound, Kane reported. No movement in the towers, but that could be tactical positioning. Viviana settled the Osprey onto the improvised landing zone with delicate precision, the main gear touching down simultaneously despite the uneven surface. On deck, she announced. You have 8 minutes before I have to pull power to make fuel reserves. The team flowed out of the aircraft like water, each man moving to predetermined positions with practiced efficiency. Within 30 seconds, they'd established a defensive perimeter and begun their advance toward the compound. Kane remained behind momentarily, his radio crackling with reports from the advance elements. Building secure, no resistance, came the first report. Moving to primary structure. Torres monitored communications while Viviana kept the engines at flight idle, ready for immediate departure. Through the windscreen, she could see the SEAL team moving through the compound with tactical precision, dark shapes flowing between buildings, advancing by bounds, covering each other's movement. Viper, we've got a problem, Kane's voice crackled through static. The hostages aren't here. Buildings empty except for guards who scattered when we breached. Her stomach dropped. Empty compound meant either they'd been moved or this was a trap. Either way, their mission timeline was blown, and they were exposed on hostile ground with a storm approaching. Team leader, we need immediate extraction or extended operations capability, she responded. Weather window is closing rapidly. Stand by, Viper. We're checking secondary locations. Through her headset, she could hear the team's tactical communications, clipped reports of empty buildings and abandoned positions. Whatever intelligence had led them here was either wrong or outdated, and now they were committed to a ground operation with dwindling options. Chief, she called to Torres, fuel consumption for extended hover operations. Approximately 15 minutes at current power settings before we hit minimum reserves for return flight. Viviana studied the compound through binoculars, searching for any sign of the missing hostages or the stolen technology. The mission was unraveling, but Kane's team was still on the ground, still vulnerable. She'd sworn never to leave people behind again, which meant staying until everyone was accounted for, regardless of fuel state or weather conditions. Team leader, she called on the radio, you have 12 minutes before extraction becomes impossible. I need your status and intentions. Kane's response was immediate but tense. We've located what appears to be a recently abandoned detention facility in the eastern building complex. Evidence suggests the hostages were moved within the last 6 hours. We're tracking possible egress routes now. 12 minutes to find people who might not even be on the island anymore. Viviana checked weather radar and saw the typhoon's leading edge approaching like a wall of green and red. In less than an hour, this island would be uninhabitable for anything without wings, and shortly after that, even flight would become impossible. The clock was running, fuel was burning, and somewhere in the distance, Carlos Martinez's ghost reminded her that every decision carried consequences she'd have to live with forever. Movement in the northern perimeter, Torres reported suddenly. Multiple vehicles approaching the compound from inland. Looks like reinforcements. Viviana could see dust clouds rising from the narrow road that connected the landing zone to the island's interior. At least 6 vehicles, moving fast, probably carrying enough firepower to overwhelm Kane's 12-man team. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Team leader, you've got company incoming from the north, she radioed. Estimate 10 minutes to your position. Kane's response was immediate. Copy, Viper. We've found intelligence indicating the hostages were moved to a secondary location on the island's eastern shore, requesting permission to pursue. Negative, Viviana replied without hesitation. Weather and fuel state require immediate extraction. We abort and regroup. There was a pause before Kane responded, and she could hear gunfire beginning in the background. Viper, We have positive identification of American hostages at the secondary site. Visual confirmation through drone reconnaissance. If we leave now, they're dead. The impossible choice. Abandon the rescue attempt and save the team, or risk everyone on an increasingly desperate gamble. Through the windscreen, she could see muzzle flashes beginning to strobe in the compound as Kane's team engaged the arriving reinforcements. "Chief Torres," she said quietly, "what's our absolute minimum fuel for return to base?" "Ma'am, with current weather conditions and required reserve margins, we're already below recommended minimums." His voice carried the weight of professional concern. "Any further delay puts the aircraft at risk." She understood the mathematics. Save 12 elite operators by abandoning 5 hostages, or risk 17 lives on a rescue attempt that was becoming more impossible by the minute. The Typhoon wouldn't care about their noble intentions, and the Pacific wouldn't distinguish between heroes and fools. "Team leader," she radioed, "I need your honest assessment. What are the odds of successful hostage recovery?" 30%, maybe less, but if we don't try, there's 0%. Kane's voice was strained but determined. "These people counted on us, Viper. They're Americans captured while serving their country." Through the chaos of tactical communications, she could hear the sound of intensifying combat. Kane's team was heavily outnumbered and fighting from a disadvantageous position. The smart play was immediate extraction. The right play might be something else entirely. Viviana closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of command settling on her shoulders like lead blankets. In her mind, she could see Carlos Martinez's face, hear his voice over the radio as they'd flown away 8 years ago. "Some decisions haunt you forever, regardless of which choice you make." "All stations, this is Viper," she said, her voice carrying the authority of final command decision. "We're staying. Team leader, you have 15 minutes to locate and secure the hostages. After that, we extract regardless of mission status." Kane's relief was audible even through the radio static. "Copy, Viper. Moving to secondary location now." Torres looked at her with professional concern. "Ma'am, that puts us well below fuel minimums. We'll be flying on vapors." "Then we better make every decision count, Chief." She advanced power slightly, preparing for what might become a very difficult departure. "Monitor all frequencies. If this goes wrong, we'll need every advantage we can get." Outside, the storm clouds were building, and time was running out for everyone on the island. The firefight intensified as Kane's team fought their way out of the compound toward the eastern shore, where intelligence suggested the hostages were being held. Viviana could hear the tactical communications through static and interference, brief reports of contact, casualties, ammunition status. The professional calm in their voices couldn't quite mask the desperation of their situation. "Team 3 is taking heavy fire," Kane reported. "We've got one wounded, still mobile. Estimate 8 minutes to secondary location." Through binoculars, Viviana could see smoke rising from multiple points around the compound. The enemy had committed significant forces to prevent extraction, which suggested the hostages and stolen technology were valuable enough to risk everything protecting. That might work in their favor, or make the final extraction impossible. "Viper, we've got SAM sites activating," Torres called urgently. "Multiple tracking radars are painting us. They know exactly where we are." She'd been expecting this development. Their extended hover over the landing zone had given enemy forces time to organize a coordinated response. The SA-18 missiles surrounding the island were now active threats, creating a lethal umbrella that would make departure extremely hazardous. "Chief, plot me an egress route that maximizes terrain masking," she ordered. "We'll need to use the mountain peaks to break radar lock long enough to get clear." "Working on it, ma'am. But with current fuel state, we won't have energy for extended evasive maneuvering." Another constraint, another risk factor. Viviana found herself calculating fuel burn rates and flight profiles with the same precision she'd once applied to quarterly earnings projections. But instead of stock prices and market share, the variables now included lives, weather patterns, and enemy missile capabilities. "Team leader," she radioed, "status report. I'm showing multiple SAM sites going active." Kane's response was interrupted by the distinctive crack of rifle fire. "We've reached the secondary compound. Visual confirmation of 5 American hostages, but the location is heavily defended. We'll need additional time to execute rescue." "How much additional time?" "20 minutes minimum." The number hit her like a physical blow. 20 minutes would put them 40 minutes past minimum fuel reserves, flying into a typhoon with systems that might not be able to maintain stable flight in extreme weather. It was professional suicide. Negative, team leader. Weather and fuel constraints make extended operations impossible. There was a long pause before Kane responded, and when he did, his voice carried a note she'd never heard before, something between pleading and command authority. "Viper, one of the hostages is Navy Lieutenant Jennifer Walsh. She was the test pilot for the stolen aircraft. Without her alive, that technology stays compromised permanently." Walsh. Viviana knew the name from classified briefings she'd attended years ago. Test pilots were rare, especially ones cleared for experimental programs. Losing Walsh would mean losing months or years of technical knowledge that couldn't be replaced. But saving Walsh meant risking the lives of everyone on the mission, including Kane's entire team. The rational decision was clear. The human decision was something else entirely. "All stations," she said finally, "revised timeline. You have 12 minutes to secure hostages and reach extraction point. After that, weather conditions make flight operations impossible." She was splitting the difference, giving Kane's team a chance while maintaining some margin for survival. It wasn't enough time for a careful operation, but it might be enough for a desperate one. Torres was monitoring fuel consumption with the intensity of a man watching his life savings evaporate. "Ma'am, we're now at critical fuel state. Any further delay means we don't make it back to base regardless of weather." Through the windscreen, she could see the typhoon's leading edge approaching like a gray wall across the Pacific. In less than an hour, this island would disappear beneath wind and rain that could destroy aircraft on the ground and make flight impossible for anything without the power of a commercial airliner.